Hello, everyone. We're doing an update on Tropical Storm Fred as it does move toward the Panhandle, and we are going to have impacts everywhere. And I am talking about the entirety of the Panhandle. Now, obviously, we will pinpoint who will see what and when, and the timeline has certainly changed just a touch from what we have focused on throughout this weekend and last week leading up to this. Of course, we were really wondering where Fred would reform. That now has happened. So shifts in the track majorly east or west not going to happen as we're now nearing landfall as we head into the day tomorrow. So now it's all about who's going to see what and the details that boils down to it. And bottom line with this storm is it's going to be a rain event. Yes, there's going to be some gusty winds out there, and there certainly could be some power outages and some trees down, especially from thunderstorms that happen in the feeder band that produce some heavy winds down to the surface. And even when we get to the eye wall, or if there is an eye wall of this system, because I'm not completely convinced that we're going to have convection completely wrapped around the center of this storm, but we may have a storm that's near the center that helps push down that wind to the surface. Because in reality, if you don't have a strong storm like a hurricane, typically you need wind, you need convection to push that wind down to the surface, so you need rain. So if you have an exposed eye and center of low pressure and there's no rain wrapped around that, you're not getting the wind down to the surface. You're just going to have some breezy, gusty conditions. And many of us are going to experience that tomorrow, is that there just won't be enough convection to push that wind all the way down to the surface. So even though the storm may eventually end up being rated as maybe even a Category 1 hurricane, I just don't think that many of us are going to see that extreme of winds. Isolated areas, sure, could see some big-time wind gusts out of this, but for the most part, all of us are going to see rain, very heavy rain, and the possibility of isolated tornadoes across the area. Beach impacts are going to be there as well. 6 to 10 foot waves will be likely at peak conditions for the day tomorrow. The good news from yesterday to today, if there is some good news out of this system reorganizing, is it's going to move inland a little bit quicker than what was expected yesterday. So rainfall totals have come down a touch versus what we were talking yesterday, where we were concerned that maybe this thing would stall near Mobile for a day or two, which we would have been talking about some much higher rainfall out of that. So that was the concern yesterday. Today, less of a concern on just overall major flooding around the area, but still going to be a very heavy rain event. Also going to have at least 5, 6, maybe 7 hours of a tornado threat as that feeder band does rotate on through until the center can work its way inland and start to die out. And with this being a very small storm, and we'll get to that in just a second, this is going to die out very, very quickly as it moves ashore. So the most intense it's going to be is just as it's coming ashore. And then after that, things are going to quickly improve. We'll be talking about this storm very much fading very, very quickly because it is such a small storm. It's not going to take a whole lot of friction to disrupt this thing. On top of that, if there is more, that is also going to be running into shear. So that's the good news here, is today is the day for the storm to strengthen. As we get to landfall tomorrow, storm is going to be getting closer and closer to higher amounts of shear, which will also create a weaker system. So again, this could, and I'm not taking away from it, it could work all the way up to a Category 1 hurricane. That is very possible. I think it is extremely possible that we see a Cat 1 just off of the coast. I don't think many of us across the Panhandle will experience Category 1 type hurricane conditions, but there could be a few, especially right on the coastline, that see that. So we'll get into this a little bit more. But before I go any further, any questions that you have regarding anything, you can put them into the comment section. I'm going to try to go through those as best as possible. If you have questions about certain locations, rainfall timing, things like that, guess what? I'm going to cover all of that. So if you just stay tuned and stay here with us, you'll be able to see the timing of everything. And I'm going to be as specific to each points and locations as possible to try to help each and every single one of you that are looking at this from a different perspective, because it will be a different storm depending on where you are from west to east across the Panhandle. So this is the generalized expected impacts across the area. I'm expecting that most people will see at least 25-mile-per-hour winds. Some of us could see winds sustained up to 40, 45 miles per hour. And we could see gusts 55 and 60 certainly will be possible along the coast, especially if there is an eye wall with the system. Again, that's not a guarantee because this is a weak, lopsided system. And I say weak in relative terms. We're not talking about a major hurricane here. We are still talking about a tropical storm. Even if it does make its way up to a Category 1 hurricane, the possibility of this thing having convection wrapped all the way around it still on the lower side just because of shear that it has been battling. Today, it's able to organize because the shear has dropped off. Storm surge anywhere from Mobile all the way down to Port St. Joe and Indian Pass is expecting 1 to 3 feet of storm surge. That includes all of the bays. So the Choctawhatchee, we have St. Andrews, and Port St. Joe. All of them are expecting 1 to 3 feet of storm surge. Once you get over to Indian Pass and all the way up to St. Mark's in the Bend, expecting 2 to 4 feet storm surge there. The reason for that, well, there's a long convection band on the eastern side. So the wind will be piling up along that coastline. And even though you're going to be further away from the center, that is where we are expecting higher water as far as storm surge goes. As far as the tornado threat goes, it's isolated in every single tropical event, but it will certainly be possible, especially in the main feeder band. Wave heights we've already covered, 6 to 10 feet at peak. Flash flooding and gusty winds remain the biggest issues for the impacts here. This is what Fred looks like now, and you'll notice that the circulation has gotten its act together. It's still being sheared out of the south and west, so the circulation is embedded on the southwest side of that big blob of convection down there, and it's not that far away from the coast as we speak. And the latest guidance and hurricane hunters finding 40 miles per hour as the peak winds. That was at noon today. I'm expecting that the next update, since things have appeared to organize even a little bit better, will come in at 45 or possibly even 50. And if it is all the way up to 50, they may up the intensity forecast to include, yes, a Category 1 hurricane before landfall. I believe that that is very possible at this point because shear not causing as much of an impact as it has over the last several days on this system. Now, that is top end. Again, you'll notice if you look up toward New Orleans, you see the thunderstorms there. You see the thunderstorms over toward Houston. Well, the storms over toward Houston are being propelled by an upper level trough. So that's greater shear. The shear that has been in place was by an upper level trough that was hanging out over us the last couple of days. That's why we've had the showers and thunderstorms. And that has now moved off to the north and weakened. So it is in an environment that is marginally conducive for strengthening, which is why it has organized today. So this is what it looks like, and it does look like it is getting its act together a little bit better. The next update from the Hurricane Center, the National Hurricane Center, will come in about 30 minutes or so. That's when we'll see it. So the latest update showing a 40 mile per hour max wind, pressure down to 1,007 millibars. I would expect that the next one comes in at about 1,004. That would be my guess. That should put it at about a 50 mile per hour storm would be my guess. But I'm just guessing here. And as we move things forward, timing suggesting that as we get into tomorrow morning, this will be approaching the shore. The National Hurricane Center has it not making landfall until about 7 o'clock in the evening. However, I think that it may be a little bit sooner. I think it probably comes in about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, not as late as they are suggesting. But you will notice that anywhere from Panama City all the way west to Pensacola is potential landfalling spots. Now, the latest guidance here actually shifting a bit to the east, and that would be to be expected if the storm is organizing, which it looks like it is, because the banding and structure of it is being sheared from the south and west. That would obviously pull the storm east. If it is pulled to the east, things should happen a little bit quicker. And you'll notice Monday timeline there at the top of your screen showing 5:50 for the majority of this of the hurricane models showing landfall around that point in time, about 5:50 in the afternoon versus 7 o'clock. So I believe that the National Hurricane Center will not only up the intensity just a touch in the next advisory, they will also up the timing just a touch. So this will happen a little bit sooner and maybe just a touch stronger than expected earlier on today, just because it has been allowed to organize and should be able to continue to organize at least for the next 12 hours or so. But once it runs across the shoreline, this thing will quickly weaken into a depression probably by the time it reaches Alabama. So this is going to quickly turn away from any kind of wind event on the coast into a rain event and a tornado threat event, which is really the biggest issue across most of the area. Small storm, which means the radius of wind, especially if we do get this thing all the way up to a hurricane, will be very, very small. So that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about most seeing wind, as this is the latest guidance showing the wind across the area. And you'll notice this says at the top, max wind gusts. So even if the storm makes it all the way up to the high-end tropical storm or possibly even a Category 1 hurricane, what does the wind gusts look like across the area? Well, you don't see any 60s on there, do you? You see a whole lot of 40s. Because again, you have to have convection mixed down that wind. And as soon as this comes ashore, we will be talking about this thing falling apart very, very quickly. So while I have been saying this is not a wind event, and I will reiterate, this is not really a wind event for most. Some of us will have some gusty winds and possibly even some downed trees across the area, across the entirety of the Panhandle. That is very possible, but we are not talking about major widespread damage from wind here. We are, however, talking about a lot of rain and potentially a lot of rain in a very short period of time. And that is really the biggest issue that is going to affect the most people. So yes, you may have some gusty winds tomorrow. You may have some gusty conditions throughout the day. And I'm not sure why this isn't showing up. That's a very puzzling. We'll just go to the next one, see if the other one's going to show up for us. There it goes. Looks like the GFS is going to work for us. Maybe the latest Euro coming in. But anyways, you may have some gusty winds at your location, and yes, your location may experience some wind damage. That is very, very possible. I mean, we are still talking about a moderate to strong tropical storm, but across the entirety of the area, you see 2 to 5 inches of rain here. That is much bigger impact than the narrow strip of area that may see damaging winds. And damaging winds happens at about 58 miles per hour and greater, which is why that is what they use for severe thunderstorm warning, because that's when we start talking about there being the potential for trees to fall and roof damage at 58. So if you have gusts at 40 to 50, sure, some loose soil trees could fall. We could definitely have some damage based off of that, but you're not talking about structural failure at 55. You got to get all the way up to 60 before that happens. So we're not talking about widespread wind damage here. We are, however, talking about a lot of rain across the area. And this is the GFS showing a good bit of 3 to 6 across the area. That is why I do have the forecast for that. The Euro also showing that amount. Now, the GFS and the Euro both are 3-hour models, meaning that they are projecting over 3-hour period. So once you get into the in-betweens, that's what you're missing, the convective output, meaning thunderstorms. When thunderstorms happen, they produce more rain than just a blob or consistent rain shield. So you can be seeing some much heavier rainfall rates than what you normally do, especially out of a tropical system. So those rainfall totals for the highest amounts possible, I'd say double whatever the output you see there. So if 5 is showing up, then 10 is possible if you get under thunderstorms. So let's talk about timing here. This is Fred as we go through tonight. You'll notice convective showers and thunderstorms rotating through. But we really don't get into the bulk of it until about 9 a.m. tomorrow. That's when we'll start to see the core density of the storm, basically the central part of the storm, start to work close enough to the shore that we're talking about impacts across our area. So this really will be about the beginning time threat where we could be talking about tornadoes, because at this point we'll be starting to get into the northeast side of this storm. But mainly at 9 a.m. will probably just be the coastal areas, so Franklin County, back down to southern Gulf County. That's going to be the greatest risk for tornadoes at that point in time. As we go forward just a little bit, we're not going to have to go forward much. You'll notice this This is about the center of the storm. Notice that it does not show a wrapped clear eye wall around the center of the storm, but it is a very, very tight center. So we could, in that center where the thunderstorm there is on the northern side of the rotation of the central pressure, we could be talking about some very strong winds in that thunderstorm in our Barron 3K here, showing that storm rotating right across Panama City. So at this point in time, we would be talking about Panama City, Blountstown, Tallahassee, maybe even all the way up to Mariana being under the tornado threat. And then obviously the greatest impacts at this point in time would be watching whatever convection is wrapped around that center moving ashore, because that's where the strongest winds are going to be at that point in time, because they'll be pushing the winds down to the surface. But this is a great representation of what I was just talking about, which is you have to have convection to push the wind down to the surface. And this isn't like the hurricanes that you know in the past where you've got a real strong concentric eye all the way around the center. It's not going to look like that. It's going to look like this, where it is ragged, it is broken, and most of the rotation in the middle of the storm is exposed because dry air is going to be chipping away at this. And as we go through the day on Monday, we're going to have increased shear. So this thing will be weakening as it gets really close to the shoreline. And then once it goes on shore, watch how fast this thing falls apart. And I mean, it will fall apart quickly. So fortunately for us, the center really falls apart as this thing, at this point in time, making landfall about 5 o'clock, again, sooner than the National Hurricane Center has. But from here, I'd be talking about Mariana, Blountstown, Apalachicola, all of Liberty County, all of Franklin County, Calhoun County, Bay County, Washington County, and Holmes County would all be under the tornado threat at that point in time. That doesn't mean that we're going to have tornadoes. You notice the main feeder band being projected here from Blountstown to Apalachicola. That's really where the tornado threat would be if the feeder band lines up there. But you don't know exactly where that convection is going to line up based off of where the center goes. But based off of our modeling here, showing the center making landfall in South Walton, probably Santa Rosa is what it's showing at this point in time. But again, it could happen anywhere between Panama City and Pensacola. And then as we go into the overnight hours, the tornado threat quickly starts to fade, with exception to those maybe in Franklin County back into Wakulla, as well as Leon and Gadsden, because that is where the main feeder band still showing up as the storm does pull off to the north. But the storm quickly weakening as we go through the overnight. By midnight, we're probably talking about the storm being gone, the feeder band being gone, and by Tuesday, the sun probably comes back out, probably by about mid-morning. So that's what it looks like as far as the FUTURECAST goes from our in-house modeling. How about a little convective trends for you here as far as rainfall totals? This is what I'm talking about. You can double those bigger models and you can get the output that way. So our rainfall totals coming in anywhere from about 4 to maybe even all the way up to 7 or 8 inches of rain in that main feeder band. But notice where the center went, Santa Rosa, Definiak Springs, maybe a ½ inch to 2 inches of rain. That's because the center is likely going to be wrapping in dry air. So again, I'm not entirely convinced that we have all that much in the way of convection right around the center. Even if this is classified as a hurricane, if you don't have convection there, you will not be pushing those winds down to the surface. So for the majority of us, this is going to be a heavy rain event and a probable tornado event. We could see several tornadoes across the area. I don't think we're talking about an Ivan scenario here or anything like that. This is a much weaker storm than that. But there is the possibility that we could have several tornado warnings across the area. I think that is very, very possible. And I think that we will have some flash flood warnings across the area because we're talking about 4 to 8 inches of rain and probably about 6 to 7 hours. So it won't take much in the way of thunderstorms to go over the same area to produce flash flooding, especially in those lower lying spots that are prone to flooding. So that's what we're looking at as far as the system goes, and that's what we're expecting. How about wind speeds? A little bit closer detailed look here as we go through time. Should see the wind speeds ramp up overnight tonight, especially Apalachicola, St. George Island. And going through the morning tomorrow, 40, 45 mile per hour winds will be very possible, especially down along the coast. Again, the coastal areas seeing the brunt of the wind here because as this moves inland, this will quickly fall apart. So Panama City, your peak winds probably come in about 35 to 45 miles per hour. That would be the max wind speeds in Panama City, I would believe. We might have a couple gusts around the area, 50, 55. That is very possible. And certainly if we do get a 50, 55 mile per hour wind gust, we will have some reported damages in certain areas. But most of what we're talking about here is that this will fall apart very, very quickly as it moves ashore. And wind speeds in Defuniak Springs, Mariana, certainly you're going to have tropical storm type of conditions, but you're not going to be seeing the wind that the coast does. So as far as the wind goes, this is mainly going to be along the coast and along the bays is where you will experience the wind. So that's from Franklin County all the way over to where the center will likely make landfall in Walton County or maybe Western Bay County. That's where you'll see the greatest winds. On the western side of it, Pensacola, back over to Mobile, probably a north wind, probably dry air wrapping in, which means you don't see that much way in the rain, you don't see that much in the way of wind, and you won't see that much really from the storm at all on the western side of the system. So if the center continues to slide east, then those in Walton County might get extremely lucky and see far less. Or maybe it gets all the way to the east. Maybe it makes landfall near Panama City. Then Panama City, you would see, believe it or not, probably less conditions or better conditions if that were to be the case, especially you end up just on the western side of it. But I think that this makes landfall somewhere in the western side of Bay County or probably Walton or Okaloosa County. That seems the most likely at this point based off of modeling. So that's what we're looking at here. Overall, I have referred to this as a minor event. And yes, for some, this will have impact. Flooding will definitely be an impact for some. But the reason I refer to this as a minor event is because we're not talking about a major system here. We're talking about something in a couple of days that we will be able to recover from, we'll be able to clean up from, and we'll move on like nothing happened. So this isn't going to take that long to pick up after and return right back to our typical summer activities. So that's basically why I have been referring to it as such. That doesn't mean that you need to take it lightly, because certainly you should be prepared. I have been telling you since last week, you should be prepared for a Category 1 hurricane, and I am going to reiterate that here. It doesn't mean that that will happen. I just think that that is a possibility, so that's what you should be prepared for. We have been saying that over and over and over and over again. If you don't believe me, go back and watch last Thursday's Tropic Topics, where we stated exactly that. So that's what we're doing with here. I'm going to go through the comments here. Spencer, if you got anything right off the top of your head, or you've seen anything that you want to throw out at me, let me know. But I'm going to scroll through the questions here really quickly and see if I can't answer something that I did not hit on. There's a good one right off the top. What about mobile homes? I don't foresee there being an issue with this other than tornadoes. If you are in a mobile home or a manufactured home and you have a tornado warning, you need to be able to get to your sheltered area much more quickly than usual, because these tornadoes that spin up in tropical systems, they happen extremely fast. They dissipate extremely fast. And usually by the time they are warned, they have already dissipated. So you really need to be able to get into shelter very, very quickly. And obviously we know that mobile home manufacturers' homes are not where you want to be during a tornado warning. So I would suggest, if you are in a mobile home, manufactured home, camper, or something like that, Monday, maybe hang out at a friend's house, something like that, while this storm does pass. Because again, we're talking about probably about mid-morning on Monday to about midnight Monday night. That's going to be the worst of the weather. And then this is over with and gone. So maybe a 12-hour period that we're talking about where you need to not be in a mobile home. Tornadoes, tropical tornadoes in general, you probably get lucky. We're not talking widespread tornado outbreak here. We're talking about the possibility of a few tornadoes, so 4 or 5 max across the area. So no, I don't think that necessarily you're unsafe in that, but certainly there are safer places to be if you are in a manufactured home or a mobile home, especially during tornado warnings. I don't think the storm is going to cause that much of an issue for those homes, but for tornado warnings, I would never suggest that you be in that kind of structure. So there you go. That's a good one. You got anything, Spencer?
Mostly just timing for Monday, if you want to kind of reiterate that, and if you have any information on when they would close bridges or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Absolutely. We can go back to the Barron FutureCast here, and I can go through timing again. So this is roughly now, and yeah, there are some shower activity that's out there. That's more associated with the upper level trough that's been hanging out over us the last couple of days than it is from Fred. But it is in part due to Fred, because Fred is pushing out outflow. So same thing that happens with thunderstorms. Thunderstorms collapse, they push out cooler air. Well, hurricanes also dispense out that energy, or tropical systems, whatever you want to call them. They dispense out that energy, and as they do, it's pushing out cooler, stable air. Well, obviously, we had sunshine this morning. We destabilized the air. The cooler outflow from Fred is now working its way across the area and enhancing the upper low that is departing our area, which is why we've had the showers and storms. This is our typical summertime type of activity. It will fade into the evening hours. Fred's moisture will start working in later tonight, as FutureCast right here will show. See most of the activity fading into the overnight. We get into about 6, 7, 8 a.m. We'll start to see the rain increase. The tornado threat will increase at this point along Gulf and Franklin counties along the coast. Inland areas through the morning hours, probably no tornado risk. So this will likely only be a coastal tornado risk through the morning hours tomorrow. By the time we get into the middle of the day, so about 1 o'clock, once you start to see that convection lift inland, then Panama City, Bluntstown, Tallahassee, by this point in time, you would be in the tornado risk. Now, obviously, this convection here, if this verifies, would likely be producing some pretty significant wind gusts down to the surface through Bay County. I would say we probably see a severe thunderstorm warning on that, if not a tornado warning on that type of storm, if that were to verify. Now, obviously, the radar is not going to look exactly like this, but this is at least a decent depiction of what it could look like as we do go through the day tomorrow. So if we do get a thunderstorm or something like that that's just off of the center, then clearly we could be producing some wind gusts across the area. So that's certainly a risk. But this is where we would be entering that tornado risk, probably about, I would say, anywhere from about 11:30 to 1 o'clock for Bay County. That's when you're going to be in the tornado risk. Franklin County and Gulf County, you'd still be in the tornado risk at this point. Liberty County and Calhoun County, you'd be entering it. Same thing with Wakulla and Leon counties would also be entering it at this point in time. As we get into the afternoon and evening, as this thing starts to make landfall, that feeder band on the right side, and what I'm talking about is the moisture from Mariana, Bluntstown, back down to Apalachicola, that is referred to as feeder band, and that would be the main feeder band. That would be where we would be watching the most for tornadoes, because you notice that there's dry air in there. Those cells are separated, and that dry air allows for those individual cells to rotate. And as they are rotating, they produce tornadoes. So that's what we would be watching. So from Mariana, Bluntstown, probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would say the rest of the Panhandle, with exception to maybe Okaloosa County because you're on the western side. Everyone else would be at the tornado risk by this point in time, probably about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By 5 o'clock, this is moving ashore, and after this moves ashore, this will start to weaken pretty quickly beyond this point in time. We'll start to see it fade pretty rapidly as it starts to move inland. That feeder band still hanging out on the eastern half of the area, so unfortunately going into the overnight, a tornado will still be possible. It will be less likely as the storm starts to weaken and move inland, but it will still be possible that these things produce a tornado, especially on the outside edge. So at this point in time, I would say if the radar looks like this, that Franklin County, Wakulla County, Gadsden, and Leon would be at greatest risk for tornado at this point in time. And then going past midnight, we'll really start to improve conditions around the area. We'll still have some gusty winds with a southeast wind blowing behind the storm, but it won't be as nearly as impressive as it will be as the storm is approaching shore and then coming ashore. That's when wind speeds will be at their greatest. So again, probably talking about most of us seeing 25 to 45 mile per hour winds. That'll probably be the most we see across the area. Certainly could see some seeing much greater than that. So good question. I think I hit the timing pretty hard there. As far as the bridges go, just to reiterate, they typically, now I don't make the call here, so don't get mad at me. Typically, the bridges close when winds get sustained at 40 miles per hour, because that's dynamic enough that we are talking about the bridges needing to be closed. I don't think that we are going to get to a point where we have sustained winds above 40 miles per hour. So I highly doubt that they close the bridges. They might close the bridges out of anticipation if we do have this thing ramp up to a Category 1 hurricane. But even if that happens, again, we're not changing the forecast much here because of the structure of this system. So that would be the only scenario I could see that they would close the bridges. But typically 40 miles per hour sustained winds is when they would do it. Right now, we are not projected to have 40 mile per hour sustained winds across the area. So certainly we could see gusts higher than that, but I'm talking about sustained 1 minute interval winds where the wind is blowing 40 for at least a minute. We are not projected to have that. So that's where we're at now. As far as closures and cancellations, because I do see that on the questions here, you can go to mypanhandle.com. We have them all listed on there. We also have places where you can go get emergency services, sandbags, things like that. It's all up on the website. So I'm not going to sit here and list all the schools that are closed because there's quite a few of them tomorrow. So you can feel free to go to mypanhandle.com and look for yourself on the closures for everything that is up there. So that's that. What else? We got anything else? Hello, Aaron. I see that Aaron is watching.
It's mostly timing and bridges.
Timing and bridges.
Comments right now, so I think you nailed it.
All right. Well, I do have a weather question here, and I always like to explain weather questions. Someone said, explain shear. If you go back and you watch Tropic Topics 3, this is why it's important to watch every week, because we hit on a lot of these topics when we're bored and we have nothing to talk about. We actually talk about the weather stuff. But shear is actually what we refer to as the atmosphere is not just what you see at the surface. There's layers to it. So here's the surface. Here's what the air is doing above the surface. Then there's another layer and another layer and another layer. Now for tropical systems, you want the column of air from the surface all the way up to the upper level to be vertically stacked. So you want them to align. When you have wind direction in this layer of the atmosphere that is faster than this wind at the surface, then you start to tilt the column. So from the upper levels to the surface, you're talking about a tilted column that looks like this. Well, the energy has a hard time working its way up that tilted column, and thus it takes a harder time for the surface pressure to actually lower and strengthen the system. So as the wind is pushing in one direction aloft, like we've had out of the southwest, which is why it's pulling the clouds off to the north and east, that is what we refer to as vertical wind shear. Now, often what happens, especially what has happened today, is that the column, for the most part, was tilted like this. Well, now we've seen a shift in our wind shear, so the column has actually helped align thanks to the shift in the wind shear, but as we get into Monday, it will shift the other way. So this is why I don't think that we're going to see sustained intensification, at least not rapid intensification. We may see a slow, steady intensification, but we're keeping the wind shear around, so we're going to continue to see that tilted column from the surface to the upper levels, which means that this storm isn't just going to go into RI, what we refer to as rapid intensification, at least not for an extended period of time. It may do it very shortly, and it may have already done it based off of the structure that I've seen, because it is a very small center, which is why I believe that it is still possible it could work its way up to a Category 1 just based off of the structure that I've seen today. But that doesn't mean that that is actually going to happen. Just means that I think it is a possibility. And I'm never going to lie to you guys. I want to be honest with my opinions on what I'm seeing and what I'm doing out there. Even if it means that my forecast earlier on was wrong, I'm going to be honest about what I'm seeing currently. So yeah, I think it is still possible that this works its way up to a Category 1 hurricane. And for the most part, we've been saying that that was a possibility from last week all the way up to this point. Now, yesterday I was optimistic that this thing had fallen apart and it wouldn't get its act together. Unfortunately, last night, wind shear dropped and it got its act together. So now we are where we are, and all we can do is move on from here to landfall tomorrow, and then through landfall, which this thing, thankfully, is going to fall apart very, very quickly once it does work on land. And it looks like the timing, again, probably deteriorating weather as we get to about mid-morning tomorrow. So about 9 a.m. we'll start to see the weather really decrease. And then as we go all the way through about 5 to 7 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when the worst weather will be working through. And then going through the rest of the evening into the overnight, the weather will slowly be improving. Still gusty winds for sure with the wind out of the southeast, but the winds will be improving. The weather will be improving by midnight and beyond. We'll be back to our summer pattern by Tuesday. We're going to be right back to our typical weather pattern. Only difference is we're still going to have swell on the beach. So if you are here vacationing or you're planning on vacationing on Tuesday, you're probably still going to have to stay out of the water on Tuesday because we'll likely still see red flags flying, double red flags at that point. May go back down to a single red on Wednesday, and then I think by Thursday we're all well and good. Unfortunately, we'll still probably have swell in the Gulf of Mexico because by Thursday and Friday, Grace will probably be in the Gulf of Mexico. So unfortunately, another tropical system. And certainly we will cover that as much as we need to. At this point in time, I didn't put anything on Grace in there, but at this point in time, it looks like Grace will go well off to our south and west based off of steering currents. So that's good news. We'll cover Grace when we need to cover Grace. Right now, we're focused on Fred. So I think that's a good summation. I'm scrolling through here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I see a lot of timing. All right, so if I missed your question, I do apologize, but I will try to go through and answer those questions as much as I can in my free time. But I'm going to wrap things up here. We will do another update for you. Well, we're going to be pretty stretched thin tomorrow, but we're going to continue to update for you on mypanhandle.com as well as our social media, so you can follow Kristen and myself. We'll both continue to update all of that, but you can find the latest information on mypanhandle.com. We'll also be on there. And anytime that we can jump on and push anything as far as updates go throughout the day tomorrow, we will certainly do that as well. Kristen and I will both be in studio here tomorrow, so we'll be with you through the duration of the storm. And obviously, any tornado coverage, any tornado warnings, if you don't have the Storm Track 13 app, download it now because it will alert you when you are under a tornado warning and you need to get to shelter at that point in time. You don't need to wait until the winds pick up outside. You just got to go. Got to get in the shelter, and the Storm Track 13 app is as good as anything at alerting you as long as your location services are on. If you don't turn your location services on the app, the phone doesn't know where you are and thus can't warn you when the warning happens. So you have to have location services turned on for that. But we can't see any of that data, so don't worry about that. It is just strictly for the warning services. That's it. But yeah, you do that and you have the locations turned on, you'll have the warnings, or you can get a weather radio, or you can turn on alert bait. I am not going to be a stickler about receiving warnings. Receive a warning any way you want to receive a warning. Just make sure you get the warning. Have multiple ways that will happen because ignorance is not bliss, especially when a tornado is coming through. Make sure you have a way to get a warning. I think that's it. You got anything else? Did I miss anything? Okay, that's it. We'll wrap it up.